Welcome, everyone. The Revised Center team is excited to have you all join us for today's informational webinar, Synthesizing Qualitative Literature from Research to Practice. Thank you for your presence and participation. My name is Lisette Torres-Gerald from the Revised Center team, and I am happy to start today's session with some brief welcoming remarks. For those who are joining us for the first time, we offer a brief introduction to the Revise Center. Revise is an NSF-funded resource center. We share NSF updates pertaining to informal STEM education, also known as ISE, as well as field-wide opportunities and resources focused on advancing ISE. From sharing resources via our newsletter to hosting informational sessions that support the broader ISE community, such as today's webinar, Revise strives to make meaningful advancements across the ISE field. Before we dive into today's session, we want to share a few technical details about this session. In keeping with our privacy policy, we will remove any AI, artificial intelligence, note-taking apps that attend this session, including but are not limited to Otter AI, Fireflies AI, and Fathom AI for data privacy purposes. To access our full privacy policy, please visit informalscience.org/privacy. This webinar is being recorded, and the presentation slides will be made available after the webinar. For those who may need it, closed captioning is available. To enable closed captions, click on the CC icon in the meeting controls toolbar. This toolbar is usually located at the bottom of the webinar window. Once closed captions are enabled, they will be displayed in a new closed caption box. You should be able to click and drag the captions box to move the position in the meeting window. All attendees will be muted for the presentation portion of this webinar. During the coffee hour, the mic feature will be made available. Chat and Q&A features will remain available throughout the entire session. Please take a moment to identify the chat and Q&A icons in your meeting controls toolbar. You can access these features by clicking the respective icons. You may submit questions via the Q&A feature. General comments and conversation may take place in the chat. This webinar is part of the Revise Center's greater commitment to providing resources to the informal STEM education field. It is our goal that this webinar offers a harassment-free environment and welcoming experience for all attendees. As such, we offer our session engagement norms to guide engagements during today's session. Reciprocity and accountability. Our engagement should be grounded in reciprocity, integrity, and honesty. We aim to foster a collaborative balance of personal accountability among each other. People will make mistakes, and we ask that people are accountable for those mistakes. We also ask that all in attendance interact with respect to others. Conversations end in a comma, not a period. Our conversations do not end after this session. We encourage the continuation and momentum of critical conversations you experience in the spirit of advancing the informal STEM education field. With your support and participation, we aim to move beyond compliance with these guiding principles to facilitate a welcoming, accessible, and shared webinar space. With that, we are excited to dive into this session with our presenters, Dr. Nuria Jamat Pascual and Cristina Silva. Dr. Maria Ong was planning on being here with us today, but had to cancel last minute due to a family emergency.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much to Dr. Torres-Gerald for the introduction, and thank you to the Revise Center for the opportunity to be here with you today. As Lisette said today, our webinar this afternoon is entitled Synthesizing Qualitative Literature from Research to Practice, and it is intended to serve as an introduction to qualitative metasynthesis methods. We want to begin by acknowledging the various unceded colonized lands of the United States on which each presenter is located. We are honored to be located on the occupied lands of the Cherokee and Muskogee in the state of Georgia, where I am, and the Wampanoag, Massachusetts lands in the state of Massachusetts and Rhode Island, where Christina is. This presentation is facilitated by the Institute for Metasynthesis from Turk. We are funded by the National Science Foundation, and it's composed by the 4 members on the screen. My picture is on the left. I'm Nuria Jaume Pascual, PhD, and I'm the project's co-PI and co-director. I'm a Spanish immigrant woman, and in the photo I have mid-length brown hair, dark-rimmed glasses, and a red blouse. Next to me is researcher Cristina Silva. In the photo, she has red hair and is wearing a gray blazer and a maroon shirt. Also on our team, but not presenting today, is our colleague and institute manager, Dr. Lisette Torres-Gerald, whom you will recognize as one of the leaders of the Revise Center. In her photo, she's wearing glasses and a black blouse with yellow flowers. And in the last photo is principal investigator and institute director Mia Ong. In the photo, she has mid-length black hair and is wearing a black blazer and multicolored scarf. Our full research team is made up of minoritized women located in Massachusetts, Georgia, Rhode Island, and Nebraska. We all use she, her, hers pronouns, and in this webinar, we're going to go by first names. So this is the agenda for today. We focus on the definition and purposes of qualitative metasynthesis, which we also refer to as simply metasynthesis or synthesis. We will address how qualitative metasynthesis is similar and different from other meta-study designs, and also how our team conducts metasynthesis step by step. The Institute offers advanced multi-day workshops on metasynthesis. So if you're interested in applying these methods to your own topic in informal STEM education, or are curious to learn more, we'll have information at the end of the webinar. So stay on to learn more about it. And we'll also have resources for you. Following the formal presentation today, we'll have a virtual coffee hour on the same Zoom link, starting more or less at 4 p.m. For an informal chat and to answer any questions that we don't have the chance to answer during the webinar. So we hope you'll join us. So we'll begin with definitions and purposes of qualitative metasynthesis. Qualitative metasynthesis is an umbrella term referring to a variety of study designs that synthesize qualitative literature. There are, in fact, over 20 designs that include meta-ethnographies, thematic synthesis, critical interpretive studies, to name a few. What all qualitative metasynthesis have in common is that they integrate primary research reports or literature that report the results of qualitative studies. And what you do is you gather and analyze the data, which are the findings of each report. Furthermore, all metasynthesis use formal methods of analysis, such as content analysis, grounded theory, thematic analysis, whichever is your favorite, to analyze the findings and conclusions of qualitative empirical studies to develop meta findings. Coding is often part of the process, but not always. Qualitative metasynthesis may or may not use systematic methods to identify the primary research literature that you will include in your project, depending on the design that you have selected for your work. What does systematic methods means? It means that they are replicable methods to search and select the literature. And it also means that they are comprehensive. They are trying to identify a comprehensive set of literature on the topic. It is important to note that some qualitative metasynthesis designs do not entail the use of systematic methods, and we will see that in the following slides. So there are several purposes for conducting qualitative metasynthesis, and here we'll see 4 of them. The first is that it brings together disparate qualitative literature. So It brings things like academic journals, book chapters, conference proceedings, dissertations, and it provides an efficient access to the overviews of all this literature so that it can quickly inform readers about a specific topic. The second purpose is that it helps generate new insights on a topic by facilitating theory development. So by identifying patterns across the literature, it identifies the most common findings. It brings a new or enhanced perspective or understanding to the topic of the synthesis, and it unifies disparate types of studies. A third purpose is that it helps identify the gaps in the current knowledge base, and that way creating a research agenda for future studies and influencing the direction of the field. And a fourth purpose is that by identifying common findings, qualitative metasynthesis can help inform policy and practice in the field. So here we're going to look at 4 different kinds of meta-study designs. You are going to be familiar with some of them. So what we're doing here is try to differentiate all of them to have a better idea of what qualitative metasynthesis looks like. So this slide shows 4 meta-study designs. You have this table in the handout that Christina has posted or will post in the chat. And these 4 meta-study designs are qualitative metasynthesis, quantitative meta-analysis, systematic review, and scoping review. This all have in common that they're looking at providing an overview of all of the literature on a specific topic. Now, the differences depend on the purpose of the meta-study, whether it uses systematic methods or not, whether there are formal processes used in the analysis, whether it includes studies that are qualitative, quantitative, or mixed methods, which kind, and whether the rigor of the studies that are included in the meta-study are assessed. So this table includes examples for each type, and all of these examples are in informal STEM learning. The chart and full references are available in the handout, and the handout also includes other resources that that will be useful to you. I see there's a hand up. I think that right now, because we have so much to cover, if you can put your question in the Q&A, if it's something that needs to be addressed immediately, then I can stop and address it. Otherwise, maybe wait to see if that is something that we're going to be covering already in the presentation. And then we are going to have a Q&A session and the coffee hour. So we will definitely address your questions. The next slide here, yes. So the main distinction here, we're comparing metasynthesis and meta-analysis. So the main distinction between the two is that they use different methods, both in the literature that they identify and in how the synthesis is done. So a qualitative metasynthesis will look for qualitative studies and will use qualitative methods to create meta findings. And a quantitative meta-analysis, usually just meta-analysis, uses quantitative methods or experimental designs, not experiential, but experimental designs, and use statistical methods to develop the meta findings. The next comparison is qualitative metasynthesis versus systematic review of the literature. So the main difference between a systematic review and a qualitative metasynthesis lie in the use of literature selection and analysis methods. So a systematic review, by definition, will use systematic methods to identify the literature. Metasynthesis may or may not use systematic methods. And in terms of the analysis, a metasynthesis will use formal analysis methods, and a systematic review may or may not use formal analysis methods to develop the metasynthesis. So given the variability of the methods used in both of these designs, metasynthesis and systematic reviews may look very similar and being called different names. And sometimes these are differences that have to do with the disciplines where they're being done. Another comparison that we are looking at is qualitative metasynthesis versus scoping reviews. So the main differences have to do with whether they look at the quality of the rigor, let's say, of how the studies that are included are done, and the purpose of it. So a scoping review aims to rapidly map the concepts underpinning the research topic that you're looking at, and to provide an overview of the main sources and the type of evidences that are available. While a metasynthesis looks to provide meta findings for a literature, for a set of literature on this topic. So a scoping review might not describe the findings in detail or look for patterns the way a qualitative metasynthesis would. However, a scoping review will help in determining what literature is available on the topic and whether it makes sense to do a systematic review or qualitative metasynthesis. So sometimes in the literature, you find a scoping review published first and then a qualitative metasynthesis later on, a couple of years later, for example. So a scoping review, because it's rapid, it's fast, it also may be the best choice for a meta study if the funds or the time are limited. A scoping review differs from a metasynthesis in the sense that it does not employ systematic methods to identify the literature or formal analysis methods, and also it does not assess the rigor of the literature, something that the metasynthesis does do. And we will learn about this critical appraisal later on when Christina presents. So now we have kind of gone over all the main concepts and the differentiation between different kinds of meta studies. And now we're going to look at the stages and the methods that we use when we do a qualitative metasynthesis. This is a flowchart that we've developed for that shows the different stages of a metasynthesis, from the pre-search to the literature search and selection to the analysis. And this is what we do in our team. Today, we will give you a quick overview of each stage, and I will start with the pre-search, and Christina will go over the other two stages. So the pre-search is the first stage where you start defining the things that you're going to need to do in the following stages. It's the moment when you make all these decisions to frame your synthesis, what theoretical framework you're going to use, what synthesis question you're going to have, what your search terms and engines are going to be, and what criteria are going to define your inclusion and exclusion of the literature. So one of the first things that you do is develop a synthesis question. What is a synthesis question? It is basically the research question for a synthesis project. We give it a different name so that we don't get it confused by the research question of each of the studies that you will include. What it does is that it delimits the phenomenon or the topic of interest and the scope of the project. And it guides all the decisions that come afterwards, such as what literature you're going to include and what your eligibility criteria are going to look like. A viable synthesis question should be clear and should specify the scope of your metasynthesis. We're going to see an illustration of what a synthesis question looks like and how it helps in defining the phenomenon. So here in the example, we have an actual example from metasynthesis that is included in your packet. We have cut it a little bit to make it more easily manageable. What programmatic elements foster neurodivergent children's development in informal STEM learning programs? So if we break it down into sections, you'll see that one set of bubbles focuses on the population. We're not looking at all children or teenagers. We're specifically looking at literature on neurodivergent children. Then another set of bubbles focuses on the content areas. It's not arts, it's not literacy, it's STEM. In the final set of bubbles, we're focusing on the setting. We're looking at informal settings, not homes, even though it is considered an informal setting. In this case, we're looking at informal settings such as museums and after schools, not homes and not schools. So the literature that we include will need to cover all of these three areas, meaning that anything that does not cover one of these areas is out. Let's look at the criteria to include and exclude. So we have three types of criteria: search, selection, and critical appraisal. The overall purpose of this criteria is to establish the standards to identify the appropriate literature that you're going to include and exclude from the synthesis. The search criteria are basically the words and dates that you're going to include in your search engines. So it will have to be words and phrases that have to do with your synthesis topic and the years of publication. The selection criteria narrows down the search results to fit the synthesis question. So, for example, this would be things that are not easily included in the search, such as what type of studies you're going to be including, like qualitative versus quantitative or mixed methods, or the country of the study. You usually don't put US in the search. It is something that you ascertain when you look at the literature. And then the critical appraisal, which are the criteria to ensure that the literature meets rigorous research methods criteria so that you can develop rigorous meta findings. So in here, what you would include would be things such as whether the study includes a research question, whether they describe the data collection and analysis methods, whether the findings are supported by sufficient evidence, and other things like that. These criteria are usually dependent on the standards and practices in your specific discipline. So in some disciplines, some things are a given, that's what you do, and sometimes some of these things are not necessarily part of the standards. Let's look at an example. So here, continuing with the same synthesis question, what programmatic elements foster neurodivergent children development in informal STEM learning programs? What we've set up here is that our search criteria will have to do with the population. We're looking for neurodivergent children. We're looking at also the content and the setting, so informal programs and STEM content. And the year of publication, we've selected 2010 to 2025 to have relatively recent literature that will still be relevant. Things that are older than, I don't know, like 20, 25 years might not be that relevant anymore. So then we go into the selection criteria. We would continue with the same criteria. So you already have the results and you're looking through the results, and we are adding things like that we cannot put in the search engine. And we're only including qualitative studies in this case. So any quantitative or mixed method studies that comes up is not going to be included in this specific metasynthesis. And then the last set of criteria, the critical appraisal criteria, are that it needs to have sufficient evidence. So the quotes and the images support the findings. And that they have a description of the methods that are used and the research question. So any study that does not fulfill this criteria will not be included, even if they cover the right population content and context. Later, Christina will cover the application of this criteria during the filtering process. Then, one of the things that we need to do is develop search terms and search strings. The purpose of this is to identify terms that will allow you to do efficient searches, to retrieve results that are targeted and contribute to answering the synthesis question that you're trying to address with your synthesis. You can use index terms, which are predetermined by publications, free text keywords, or a combination of the two. We usually use a combination. It sets a broader net for the synthesis. Search strings are a combination of the search terms with Boolean operators to create search strings that will be inputted in your engines to conduct your searches. Literally, put it in and press enter to get your results. So now, I've been talking for quite a bit. Now we're going to get you to participate a little bit. So what we're going to do here is we're going to create a word cloud to identify search terms that this group of people here today would use to conduct a qualitative metasynthesis with the following synthesis question. What programmatic elements foster neurodivergent children participation in informal STEM learning programs? Let's take half a minute to share the search terms. What words would you put into a search engine to conduct this metasynthesis? So scan the Slido QR code and let's start seeing. There you go. Disability. Okay, remember that we have programmatic elements, informal STEM, and neurodivergent kids. So here we have words that have to do with the population. Now I start seeing words that have to do with the content and with the programs. Summer camps, informal settings, after schools, that's the settings. Yes. Infirmary learning, interesting. Out of school time. How about words for STEM? Would it be just STEM? What other words can you use for STEM? Oh, we have museums, we have autism, ADHD, May. Okay, we have math. We have computer science, STEM, science, engineering. Okay, technology, assessment. So you notice that at the beginning we were focusing a lot on the population, but slowly we were like, hold on, but I need to make sure it's in out of school time settings. And then it was like, oh, wait, but STEM can be a lot of things, not just the general STEM. It can be also engineering and computer science and technology. So all of those, all of this would be an interesting set of words that could be useful for this metasynthesis. I'm seeing words like program evaluation and assessment, that if you're an evaluator and you're doing a metasynthesis on evaluation, you might want to use those words. Or if you want to include evaluation reports, you might also use those words, but those might take you in a different direction from what you might want to do with this metasynthesis. So now let's move on to the next slide. Thank you everybody for participating. That was really cool to see how it grew. These are some examples of the terms that our team has come up with. So sometimes you might use current or historical terms, such as, for example, we're looking at autism or autistic, but also Asperger's, because it's relatively recent that Asperger's was being used, and there are people who still use it. ADHD, hyperactive, etc. So all of these words could be words for neurodivergence. And there are more. There's dyscalculia, there is OCD, there are others. So it depends on what you want to focus on, or you want to be specific on the autism spectrum or other types of neurodivergence, or all of them. Informal learning, you can go into informal, out of school, free choice, or if you want to be more specific, you want to talk about after school and museums. And then in terms of STEM, STEM in general, science, mathematics, technology, engineering. So the next one, here we have what we call a search string. So this is an example that we have put together for this specific metasynthesis. So if you look at it, the first set of parentheses is for the neurodivergence terms. The second set is for the informal learning environment. And the third one is for the content area, STEM, science, math, etc. So if you think about it, what happens is here within the parenthesis, it means that at least one of these words or more of these words need to be in your results. The and in between means that you need a word from each of these sets of parentheses. So you can have any combination of those things that need to be present in your results. Now let's see a little bit of a practice of what this looks like. So a couple of weeks ago, I went into Google Scholar and I plugged in that exact search string. I put in the 2010-2025 custom range for the years. And that's a very good question. I'm actually going to answer that. And what I did is that I plugged it in and I pressed enter. I have the question of why are words incomplete? So the asterisk after neurodiver means that any word that starts like that, but ends in a different way, is going to be part of your search. So it can be neurodiverse, neurodivergent, neurodivergence, or autistic, autism, or hyperactivity or hyperactive. So with the asterisks, I don't have to put as many words. It's the same, what is it called? The same root for the word. And the asterisk helps you with the etc., let's say. So this is a little bit of what you need to figure out when you're looking for your engines, your search engines. You need to figure out the Boolean rules, which is a little bit of the grammar of the engine. So if Christina or Lisa, can you share the string in the chat? And
It's in the chat.
It's in the chat. Excellent, thank you. So if you want to plug it in, and if you want to try it, open up your Google Scholar, plug this in, put the years, And if you want to do it a little bit different, like for example, you really want it to be about museums, then replace or add museum in the informal or out of school or free choice, or add museums there and see if it comes up different. And let me know in the chat what comes up for you. So just a little comment here. If you change any of the terms, your findings are going to be different, right? But also, as I said, I did this search a few weeks ago. So we may have new literature. Even if you do the exact same search, you might not get the exact same results because it was a few weeks ago. More literature might be out there now, additional literature that was not there when I did the search. Anyone has done the search and has found anything interesting? Okay, let's look at what people find later. Let's continue because we have a packed agenda. So when you are in the pre-search stage, one of the things that you need to do is select your search engines. So right now we've just used Google Scholar, but there are other options as well. Okay, so once you have your search terms and search strings, you need the search engines that you will actually use for your searches. So for each metasynthesis, we test a series of engines that will depend on your specific metasynthesis, because search engines change. Some of the ones that we used that were very common several years ago don't exist anymore. I tried to use them for a different synthesis, and those were not there anymore. So you also want to make sure that the engines that you choose are relevant for your synthesis project and help you identify literature that is relevant for your topic and that you go beyond your disciplinary silos. So for example, we have tested up to 16 engines and ended up using 7 of those because some of them turned out not to work or to not work well enough to bring in things that had very little to do with our synthesis, and we eliminated them. And some of them were redundant. They came up with the same results, so it didn't make sense to use both. We just used one of them. So some examples here are EBSCO, the Revised Center Repository, Google Scholar, and if you're at a university, your institution's library engine would be a good place to start. Please remember that you have free access to EBSCO through Revise, so you don't need to pay to access it, so use it, okay? That's a free resource that the Revise Center provides for you. So we keep a running list of search engines that are related to our topics. And we have given you a short list of those engines in the handout. And if you have others that you have used and that you like and you want to share with others, you can put them in the link, in the chat, and we can add them to the handout. And now I'm going to stop talking, and Christina's going to take on the helm and talk about the search and selection and analysis stages of metasynthesis.
Thank you, Nadia. I am just okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you again, Nadia, for getting us to the pre-search stage. So now that we're moving from the pre-search stage, we're going to go to the search and selection stage. So we're in that second panel of that flow chart we looked at the beginning of the session. The purpose of the search and selection stage is to identify the literature that is going to be included in the metasynthesis. So this is going to involve implementing all of the decisions that you have made in the pre-search stage, as described earlier. And this would include inputting those search strings in the selected search engines and databases, applying the predetermined selection criteria, or what we call as a team filtering, and then also applying critical appraisal criteria to each literature piece, so that you can arrive to a start set. And then once you have a start set, you'll then conduct secondary searches using snowballing techniques to gather a full set of literature for analysis. In this step of search and selection, the goal is to create the start set by going through the results obtained in the previous step and then narrowing them down to those that will be included or excluded from the metasynthesis using criteria developed in the pre-search stage. The procedures for implementing those criteria are what we call filter 1, filter 2, and then the critical appraisal. So the goal of filter 1 is to identify the literature that may answer the synthesis question by examining the titles and abstracts of the literature that appears in your searches. At this stage, you're applying less, you're going to be less stringent or less strict when applying the criteria to ensure that relevant literature pieces that may answer the synthesis question are not eliminated. So when you're in Google Scholar or those or EBSCO or other databases, you're going to be using your selection criteria during those searches, because in that moment, you're essentially doing filter 1 as you're going through the titles and abstracts in your selected databases. Once you complete filter 1, and what you do is once you've identified the pieces of literature that fulfill your criteria, you're going to want to save all of that information in an Excel doc or in other tools like EndNote or Mendeley to be able to track the literature pieces you've already read and filtered in and filtered out. So at filter 1, you're looking specifically just at the titles and abstracts. When you're ready to move on to filter 2, you're going to start identifying the literature that does actually answer your synthesis question. This filter is a closer examination of the literature resulting from filter 1, but now you're going to be more strict, more stringent of the criteria that you used before. In this stage or at this filter, you're going to be reading the literature piece in its entirety. That's just to ensure that everything that you're searching for is actually present in the literature piece that you're interested in. And then essentially you're going to continue filtering to keep what is relevant to your synthesis question and then exclude what is not relevant. And then finally, you'll do a third filter, which is the critical appraisal filter. And this is to ensure that the literature that is included in the metasynthesis follows rigorous research standards. This means that the selected critical appraisal criteria should relate to clarity and consistency of the methods and evidence reported in a study. It's the final filter that will be applied to the literature. And then by the end of the critical appraisal process, all the literature that has made it through filter 1, filter 2, and the critical appraisal filter will constitute your start set for the metasynthesis. So when you are at the stage of critical appraisal, you may find that sometimes your critical appraisal criteria has to be further refined. That happened in one of our projects where we initially had a critical appraisal criteria of authors sharing the limitations of the study, but we had found that that a lot of the literature works that we had filtered through filter 1 and filter 2, some of them didn't have a limitation section. And if we continued to apply that as a critical appraisal criteria, we would actually end up having very, very few pieces of literature in our set. So even when you're in the process of applying your criteria and you're finding that the criteria in which you've selected needs to be refined, it's okay to have that conversation with your team or think more about the criteria you've selected if you're finding that, well, all of my criteria results in like nothing left over in a start set. So sometimes you will find that you might have those changes. Another instance that we always like to share about the importance of critical appraisal criteria is we, in the same project, we had a dissertation that it made its way through filter 1, filter 2, everything seemed great. And then when we were applying the critical appraisal criteria, the author was making claims that were not supported by the evidence in that dissertation. And ultimately, despite it being able to fulfill the majority of our criteria because of the critical appraisal criteria, it did not make its way. It got excluded at the end. So the critical appraisal criteria really does have a significant role in the metasynthesis process and ensuring that what you're going to be writing about maintains the same rigor and standards of the field. So as I mentioned, once you've gone through filter 1, filter 2, and then critical appraisal, you will have had the literature pieces that constitute your start set. Unfortunately, you're not going to stop at the start set. You want to have a full set. And to achieve your full set of literature, you're going to do a little bit more searching in terms of conducting forward and backward snowballing. So the purpose of forward and backward snowballing is to further develop a comprehensive set of literature that answers the synthesis question. It supports identifying relevant literature that's not part of your start set or even literature that you've even seen in your initial searches. So when you're snowballing, you're going to be applying the same filters and criteria with the literature you identify as you're going through this process of snowballing. Wolin, an expert on snowballing, recommended continuing snowballing until no new references came up for your metasynthesis, but it's not always practical to do this. We've done 2 rounds of snowballing for our own metasynthesis work, but note that we've always been funded for that kind of work. And the snowballing process is very time intensive. So it might not be practical for you to do 2 rounds. So it's always recommended, like, about consider the practicality of snowballing. And you may just do one round of snowballing, which is snowballing of your start set. Forward snowballing utilizes the cited by feature available on search databases like Google Scholar. This feature allows you to see what articles have cited the pieces in your literature start set since its publication. So this type of snowballing essentially identifies more recently published work. So you can see in this image, and also if you're already on Google Scholar, there's this button called Cited By, and you can actually see the number of citations that paper has been cited by. So this one by Jensen et al. Has been cited by 17. So you would click that, and then you would do the same process of filter 1, searching through those results to find what's relevant and to put through filter 2. And then backward snowballing is actually the opposite of forward snowballing. You're utilizing the bibliographies of literature pieces in your start set. So with the same paper, Jensen et al., you go all the way down to the references, and you're looking at older pieces of literature that are relevant to your synthesis question. But the caveat of backward snowballing is you want to make sure that you're paying close attention to the publication dates. Because oftentimes, at least when I've done backward snowballing, I've found some really, really great pieces of literature that I think are relevant to the synthesis question I'm working on. But then I notice the publication date is outside of my selection criteria. So that's something just to make sure you're paying attention to when you're backward snowballing. And then once you finish your forward and backward snowballing to whatever is most practical, you'll have completed the search and selection process after you've filtered through filters 1, filters 2, and critical appraisal once you've done forward and backward snowballing, and that is now your full set of literature. So once you've achieved your full set of literature, you're ready to move on to analyzing your literature pieces. The purpose of conducting analysis is to develop overarching findings or meta findings that provide a new understanding of the topic. So the analytic process in a metasynthesis can take many forms, such as content analysis or thematic analysis. So just remember that to fit the definition of a metasynthesis, there must be a formal analysis method applied to the selected literature. So in our metasynthesis work, we typically use the analytic approach of thematic analysis, which I will briefly describe here. The purpose of thematic analysis in a metasynthesis is to develop overarching themes that group the coded data and shape the meta findings. Adapting the ideas of methodologists Thomas and Hardin, there are 3 steps to conducting thematic analysis. The first step is coding the literature, which has the purpose of breaking down the data. The most common types of coding are deductive, inductive, and hybrid. In the interest of time, I'm not going to describe them here, but in our user guide, which is cited in the handout that was provided, we go into detail into each. So you can refer to that, or you could also examine other analytic approaches that are most common in your fields or that you're used to using. So also note that not all metasynthesis designs use coding as an analytic step, but the second step of thematic analysis is to develop descriptive themes, meaning that codes are clustered under a unifying concept that reflects what is highlighted in the literature. In this step, codes are organized based on their similarities or differences. And then the third and final step is the generation or identification of analytical themes that cluster the descriptive themes together in a more abstract manner. So analytical themes emphasize a greater main idea that specifically addresses the synthesis question being explored. So here's a brief example of going from codes to descriptive themes to an analytical theme. And remember that the synthesis question that we introduced earlier was, what programmatic elements foster neurodivergent children's development in informal STEM learning programs? So taking our example, we might develop codes related to the different types of neurodivergence, the different types of programming and formats, and then the different types of outcomes. When we group these codes together, we develop the descriptive theme, which seen here is the typology of programs and formats that support the positive development of neurodivergent children. So for example, we may find that inquiry-based after-school programs lead to positive STEM identity. So we would create a category based on this finding. And then we may identify an analytical theme by applying Decky and Ryan's theory of self-determination to understand why the types of programs and formats in our descriptive themes support neurodivergent children's positive development. In many cases, descriptive themes inform the themes or categories around which the findings section of a metasynthesis is organized, and they also inform the basis for recommendations for policy and practice reforms. Analytical themes often inform the discussion section, where findings and theory are brought together in the metasynthesis manuscript. So this is our brief introduction to metasynthesis methods. Is very quick, a very, very quick overview. But if you are interested in learning more about the qualitative metasynthesis process, here are some resources, which is our website. You can scan the QR code and have access to the free ebook or our user guide, which will go into deeper detail about our approach to qualitative metasynthesis methods. Again, you've received the handout. We will also provide the slides, and then the recording will soon be available through the Revise Center. So Lisette will have more information about that. If you're interested in learning more about the in-depth workshops with our institute, please contact Lisette. You can email her at the email address there, or you can also visit our website and contact us using the contact us form. And you can also stay online with us for our Q&A and then our coffee hour. But please stay in touch. Let us know how your qualitative metasynthesis is going, or if you have questions, we're always happy to answer them. Again, we want to thank our host, the Revise Center, our sponsor, our team members, partners, and advisors. And we have 4 minutes, but please continue to stay on if you have more questions and join us for our coffee hour. But that concludes our formal presentation. Thank you all so much for coming, and we'll take some questions.
We already have a question. Lydia asked how we would analyze the synthesized data. So if you remember what Christina just presented about thematic analysis, we typically use thematic analysis. We use hybrid coding, which is a combination of inductive and deductive coding. Then we bring the two types of codes together for a hybrid code book. And then from those codes in the code book, we do thematic analysis to find the patterns in our data in the literature that we find. So we would do thematic analysis the way Christina has explained, and those themes are usually our findings, and from there we implement the further analysis using our theoretical framework for our discussion. This is a very, very, very fast discussion of how we do our analysis. If you want more detail, we do a 1-week institute where we go through each of the things that we've done today, plus how to develop findings, how to develop a discussion, how we even write proposals to get funding for metasynthesis projects. And this year we're adding a pedagogy element to it. So if you're someone who will coach others or teach metasynthesis in to your students, we're including this new element of the pedagogy of how to train the trainer kind of thing. So that's also part of what we do in a full week metasynthesis institute. So we can go into the specifics of all of this in much more depth, and you get to practice things, you get to do things as part of the Metasynthesis Institute. It would be awesome to do an informal STEM learning Metasynthesis Institute. It would be really fun.
There's
Okay,
another question in the chat, Nudia.
about the rigorous standards.
Yes.
Okay, this is one. So not all research is made available with the same kind of rigor, with the same attention to rigor. So this might be a bit of a traditional understanding. So people have been experimenting with metasynthesis and doing other things, but I'm going to speak from this more traditional understanding of what rigor is. In rigorous research, you're trying to make your methods explicit. You're trying to make sure that people understand what you're doing, how you're doing it, and why you're doing everything, and how your methods connect to your research question, and how your findings connect to your research question. So a rigorous study is one that is coherent throughout, and that is explicit in how it's done all the things that it's claiming to do. In our neck of the woods, that means having a research question or a purpose or a hypothesis, depending on what kind of research you're looking at. You have some kind of research methods explained in the study that you're looking at. and that you have findings that are coherent and that show evidence that what you're claiming as a finding is supported by what your participants have said or what you have found through your surveys or whatever. So that is what rigor means in research. And you want the articles that you include in your metasynthesis to follow those rigorous standards for research so that you can have rigorous meta findings that are believable and trustworthy, if that makes sense. Let me see. How do we recognize rigorous when we see it? Are there other things besides what I've just said, Michelle, that would help in understanding what rigor means? Okay, sounds good. How we characterize literature. Characterize a literature review as different than a meta study. Okay, so I've been answering that question earlier in the chat. So a meta study is kind of like the umbrella term for all of the different designs that I've explained at the beginning. We had systematic reviews, we had scoping reviews, metasynthesis, and meta-analysis. All of this are meta studies. A meta study means that you're taking the literature and you're bringing it together somehow. And then a metasynthesis or systematic review, all of those are specific designs within a meta study category. So in that sense, both a meta-analysis and a metasynthesis are both meta studies, but one uses quantitative literature and the other one uses qualitative. And the difference is in the methods. In one, you're going to use statistics, right? In the quantitative one, you're going to use statistics. You're going to have experimental designs, all that good stuff. And in qualitative metasynthesis, you're going to have qualitative methods, qualitative formal analysis, etc. All that other good stuff. So they're both meta studies, just different kinds of meta studies. A lit review can be two things. One is what frames a regular study. If I'm going to interview all the parents of neurodivergent kids who attend a specific after-school program, I'm going to have a literature review that covers the literature that has to do with that topic. So the literature review frames that study that I'm doing with the parents of the kids who go to this specific after school. Sometimes people pull it out from the study and publish it independently. So a literature review doesn't necessarily have to have any of these meta-study designs. But if you really want to have a solid synthesis of the literature, you may want to use one of the meta-study designs, doing the type of search and selection of the literature, analysis of the literature, all those things that we've talked about today, to create an independent, like systematic review, if you want to do that, or a metasynthesis, which is what we've talked about today. So a literature review usually frames a study, and the meta studies are a type of study. They're independent. They're not dependent from a study. Yes? Let's see. Okay, Lisette needs to do the revised center announcement. Sorry, go ahead.
Thank you, Nuria. If you have more questions, please stay for the rest of the coffee hour. Just a quick announcement before we transition to that coffee hour. We invite you to please help the Revise Center enhance the development of future sessions by completing this brief survey. The survey should take 10 minutes or less to complete. Your participation in the survey is entirely voluntary, and your responses will be kept confidential. We will pause for a moment to share this link in the Zoom chat. We will also send the link via email following the webinar. Regardless of role, experience, or involvement with the Revise Center, your feedback and input are valued. Once again, thank you for joining us for today's session. Revise webinars like this one are designed to inform ASL project teams and the broader informal STEM education community alike. Looking ahead, we have an exciting lineup of events coming up. Here's a quick overview of the schedule. In November, we will have a revised drop-in session where we will explore some of the resources available on informalscience.org, including how you can obtain free access to the EBSCO Research Article Database. And in December, we will host sessions on our theme of the month, Playful Pathways to AI. We will be sharing more details on these upcoming events, including registration info in our next newsletter. So please be sure to subscribe. We will share the newsletter subscription link in the Zoom chat. Lastly, we also invite you to visit our website and follow us on socials for the latest Revise Center updates and happenings and ISC field-wide opportunities. Nuria and Cristina?